And let me start by throwing out, do you guys have any questions about what's in the book so far? If not, I'll say a couple of things. Who are you kidding? I could talk for hours. I know, shocker. It's a occupational hazard. All right, the first thing is, I don't care what the book says, mid-50s is not old. Don't you like that? Oh, aging, blah, blah, blah. And then look at this neat firefighter did this, he's 55. And the airplane guy landed in the Hudson River and he was 56. Okay, that is not old.
That's midlife crisis.
Yeah, maybe. What they're doing, and there's a reason they're doing this. The reason they're doing this is they're trying to make the case that here in the U.S. we're not that respectful of our old people. I get it. That's fine. And that's where they're trying to show that someone in their 50s who has 30 years worth of career experience is actually a very valuable human being. I wish it was true for everybody. In fact, lots and lots of folks, every time the economy dips and things change, lots of the folks that get dumped out the back and never get hired again are the 50-somethings, which makes it kind of a precarious age in life, depending. That said, if anybody is going to be able to land a civilian jetliner full of people and float it on the Hudson River, it's going to be somebody who's been landing these things for 30-some years. Nobody else is going to be able to pull it off except him. But they do that a number of times, enough that I think that there's a little bit of a melding together the effects of age. Because, let's face it, what's going to happen when you're landing your jetliner because you broke an engine or something, and you've got someone on board with 30 years of experience is very, very different than where are we going to put grandma now that she's 85 years old and can't live in her house? Because those are really the aging issues that I'm interested in. How we respect them is certainly tied together, but those are two different kinds of people. Billy?
What I was really surprised not to find in the reading, because it's a newer textbook, is what I think we have now is where, because people are living longer and they're living healthier because of new studies, new research, that there's a young old, there's a middle old, and then there's an old. Mm-hmm. And it's not really until you start hitting the late terms of middle old or old that the conventional definitions of old really apply.
Yeah, absolutely. That's completely true. That actually makes me think, but only tangentially, of sort of the next problem I have with the textbook. And they don't say this once, they say it over and over and over again. They say things like, the author says things like, in traditional societies, people didn't live to be old, so the elderly weren't a problem. Okay, if they said it once, I'd let it slide. But I think in the first 3 or 4 pages, they say it 3 or 4 times. This is the rankest misunderstanding of demographics possible, all right? If you look at an age pyramid, we've done this a couple times, I'm going to bring it up again. If you look at an age pyramid, okay, and this is true of even third world societies today, but of traditional societies, however we want to understand that, a couple of things become really, really clear. First of all, lots and lots of babies are born. Second of all, not that many people make it to 5, and not that many people make it to 10. So in traditional societies that don't have antibiotics and modern medicine, a lot of babies are born, a lot of babies die. So getting to the first year of age is a very important milestone for a baby. The next milestone is 5, and then 10. you lose so many down here that artificially depresses the average life expectancy. In exactly the same way that Warren Buffett artificially increases the average wealth. So there's most everybody, and then there's Warren Buffett, and he's so high that all of us look like this. Well, it's kind of the same thing. So many babies die down here that it drags the average down. Okay? And I think one of my favorite quotes from the book was, for, in a traditional society, people didn't make it over 35, and so they were treated as elders. Look, I'm not an elder. I don't care. No, don't listen to me. I have no wisdom. I am not an elder because I made it to 35. That's just not the way it works. You still have the same stages of life. Now, granted, puberty hits about 12 or 13, and we keep our kids home just a little bit longer. But just a little bit longer. By 18, you're ready to move out. That doesn't actually change that much. You can have babies all through your 20s and 30s. Traditional societies, maybe that's a little bit lower. But again, we're not pushing it back that far. So you've got the same stages of life. You just have fewer and fewer people in those stages of life. And I'm not sure why the textbook makes this mistake. It actually really bothers me because, well, just because. When you hear this in the lay population, it makes perfect sense. You don't expect them to understand the mathematics of this. But when you hear sociologists saying it, you kind of think, oh my goodness. That sort of bothers me. So I just have to throw that out there. Now, here's the other thing that I think is interesting. Where the book spends most of its time, and we can talk, you guys in the red pants, we can talk about this, we can talk about this as much as you want. But where the book spends most of its time is talking about what aging means at the individual level. All right? So, and we've got all the different theories, disengagement theory, activity theory. We've got Tyler's aging is almost dead theory, which he mentioned before class. And that's all well and good, but as a sociologist, for me, I end up thinking, what are the macro issues going on here? And the macro issues really drive my interest in this. And so I want to talk a little bit about, well, macro issues. And the best way to start this is with Social Security. Okay? Wake up, computer. While I wait for the computer to wake up,
I think your projector's broken.
Yeah,
That's probably why they have this.
that's what they have.
Maybe this is why they have the projector, huh? See, somebody should have changed the filter when it said change filter.
Oh no, no problems.
Do that? It does work. Okay. So, I want you to look at this population pyramid here. All right, so here's the population pyramid. We've spent a little bit of time talking about generations, a little bit of time talking about the effects that baby boomers have had on the population and on society. It's hard to overstate how significant this actually is. And I like this graph because this graph makes it painfully obvious how large this generation is. So if you look here, this is a 1982 graph. And in this 82 graph, it shows us that the boomers are just entering their 30s. This is the 30 to 34 slice. And if you look at this whole chunk here, this is your baby boom. And these guys reshaped society as they went through it. When these guys were kids, their parents drove the very first suburban build-out. When they went through schools, the school system expanded. When they hit college, the college system continued expanding. It had gone through a big wave with the GI Bill and the returning GIs. And I suspect that even the 1990s to 2000 suburban building economy, they weren't building suburban homes. They weren't building starting homes. They were building second, third, and fourth, like, I've done real well, I can get a nice big house homes. You know, when people still have their kids at home as well. This bump here is huge. And then look at how quickly it tails off again. This here is your Generation X. If each one of these slices is 5 years, 1, 2, 3, 4, and a little bit overlapping, then this curve down here is Gen X. When we take this a couple of years later, there's actually another bump, which is the Millie generation, which is kind of where you guys are at, most of you, not all of you, some of you. And people have called the Millies the echo boom because, you know, they grew up and did what grown-ups do and made lots more babies. Okay, here's the second thing I want you to see with this, and this matters in terms of Social Security. If old people are 65 right here and up, look at how steeply that tapers off. And if the people paying in, I mean, look at this graphically. The people paying in go from here to here, right? And the people drawing out are like this. So mathematically, you've got a lot more people paying into this system than you have people drawing out of this system. And that's how Social Security was designed. Those who don't like Social Security will call it a Ponzi scheme, and this is exactly why. And I can talk about that in a few minutes. Now, nope, let's go this way. Nope, come on, where is it? There it is. Okay. This is projected 9 years ahead, 8 years ahead, 2021. And look at the difference in this population pyramid. First of all, it's not much of a pyramid, it's kind of a stack. All right? So, let me bring up one more for you just to see. All right, look at this pretty green one here. Can everybody see that? Maybe I need to make it bigger. Can you see it? Sort of? All right. This is a developing nation. And these here are the babies that are dying off and 5-year-olds that are dying off to 10. And then when you go up through here, what you're losing are infections and injuries. That's what kills people in these kinds of societies. But it narrows out quickly. So when it comes time to pay for our old people, your working age here is quite a bit more than your drawing age up there, this population you're supporting. All right? By the time you get to a developed world, or let's say the population pyramid in the United States, the pyramid aspect is gone. What this means for you is that when you grow up and get married, you have 2 kids. You don't think of it this way, but effectively you're replacing yourself and your partner. Many people don't have any kids. And that offsets the people that have 3, 4, or 5 kids. Pardon?
Or 8.
There's a few that have 8. And they're, again, just in order to get that 2.1 replacement rate, that's how many people are also not having kids on the other end. All right? So we don't lose babies. We don't lose 5 to 10-year-olds. We don't really even lose 15 to 19-year-olds, which is kind of impressive because they do some really sketchy things. So you don't have that base paying in. Number 2 is this wave of baby boom is happening right now. This is the 2021, so they're projecting forward, but it's going to be the same, just one or two notches down. And right now, the baby boom, these guys are just entering retirement, and they're entering retirement at the rate of something like 10,000 a day. So this is a big chunk of people, okay? Now, the way this nets out, let's see how we can do this. I'm going to say 1938, this number is mostly made up. Double check it if you care. The rest of them aren't, but this one is. I want to say that there were 35 people paying in to Social Security for each one person drawing out. Does that make sense? By the time we get to 1950, and I'm going to put a question mark there because I'm not 100% sure about that one. But by the time we get to 1950, you're at 16 to 1. Now in 2012, it's not even 3 to 1, it's actually 2.8 to 1. But math is harder on 2.8. So if we bring this down to 30 for math's sake, and if we want old people to have something like $45,000 to $50,000 a year to live on out of Social Security, then look at what this means. If you've got 30 people trying to make up a $45,000 income, you're looking at 1,500 maybe? 30,000 plus 15,000 would be, yeah. So $1,500 each, and our elderly are supported. By the time we get to here, 16 is hard to do math with, 15 is easy. 15 people trying to make up $45,000 income is what, 3,000 each? Nowadays, if you're trying to make up a $45,000 income and there's only 3 of you, your share. Now, if you yourself are making $60,000, which is higher than median, it's a decent wage, $1,500, well, you know, they take that in taxes already, who cares? $3,000 hurts a little bit more. $15,000, you just saw your income cut by a quarter, right? And this trend has to do with changing that population pyramid from a pyramid to a column. Does that make sense? I think it's crazy. I love it.
So the solution is for everybody to have 4 or 5 kids.
Yes.
Because at the end, there'll be another boom. There'll be more people paying in, and you and I are.
We'll be okay.
Yeah, we'll be okay.
So have children. Go ahead.
Another solution would be for them to stop taking money out of Social Security.
Unfortunately, it won't help. Here's the thing. When you look at, and this is another one of those where there's a problem, there's the political read on it, and I want to talk about that. So in the past, when you've got this many people paying in the past, when there were budget problems, Social Security was actually used to fund other things, which is what Jamie is talking about. So if there was a shortfall here, there's Social Security money, we'll work it out somewhere else. Go ahead.
I see another trend happening, which may play into it, may not. It seems like they're limiting Social Security almost in some ways, like in the job force. If you see a lot of times, a lot of companies are firing the long tenured employees and hiring 2 more young ones that they minimum wage so that they can't retire, basically.
Hold that thought. So, because that absolutely matters. So, in the past, Social Security was used to cover other shortfalls. Somewhere, and political people who care a lot, and I only care a little bit, somewhere we passed a threshold where now Social Security can't be used to cover these other gaps. We're very close to having to backfill, if we're not already there, backfill Social Security itself. And projecting forward, just because of the plain math, politics aside, projecting forward, I don't know what the magic number is, it might be 2028, but you're not going to be able to meet these obligations at all. I mean, we simply can't. Now, here's why this is a political problem. Well, it's not a political problem, it's a problem, and our political perspectives suggest different answers, okay? So let's start with the left. So the left will say, what we need to do is to fix Social Security. So remember, from the left, if you're a leftist, from the left, you probably think the government is a tool of us, the people, to actually help us out. Now, the right thinks completely different things. We'll get there. So, as such, providing something like old age security is an absolutely legitimate and important function, if you're on the left. So these guys will say, the Social Security problem isn't as bad as you think. They'll say, the way that the conservatives present it is overblown. Okay, that's part of their marketing. So how do they propose to cover these gaps? And there are 3 or 4 different things that they're going to do. So their answer is, we got to have it, but we need to tweak it, right? And their tweaks, so notice we have a numerator over a denominator problem here, right? There's money coming in divided by money going out, and it's getting worse and worse and worse. So their tweaks are all about how do we change the numerator and how do we change the denominator here. So number one possibility is raise taxes a little bit. I have heard, and again, you got to double check all this stuff because when this gets into politics, there are all sorts of rooms for statistical shenanigans. But I've heard people say another 4%, not 4% of what you already pay, but another 4% of your total income would be enough to fill that gap, okay? And that's if nothing else happened. But raising taxes is one way to increase what's going in. Another way would be to kill the Social Security cap. So right now, between, I think it's $110,000 and $115,000 a year, if you make up to 110, you pay Social Security. Everything you make beyond whatever that cap is, 110, 115, you're actually okay. So if you make 150, then you pay taxes up to that, or Social Security taxes up to that, we'll say 115, and then that next 35,000 are Social Security tax free, okay? But a lot of people make more than this. You got to remember, especially in the big cities where prices are bigger than they are here, it's not hard to bump into incomes that are 150, 200,000. They may be fairly well off compared to me, but there are enough of them that you can that the math starts to work out. So if you could kill that, that's going to help cover that gap, and that would be a very, very significant way to cover that gap. Something along the lines of going 70% of the way, just with that one tweak. Other tweaks on the other side are going to be raise the age. Okay? Now, right now you can start collecting Social Security at 65 years old. As Billy had pointed out, if you're taking care of yourself, 65 really isn't old nowadays the way it might have been 100 years ago. As a matter of fact, you could retire at 65 and have 10 years of good health and golfing and maybe even more, right? So to try and pay Social Security tax for someone who can still go mountain bike riding, you know, to pay them old people stuff is a little bit sketchy. So let's raise it a little bit. Maybe put it to 68, maybe even 70. Just ask people to work a little bit longer. All right? That's certainly a possibility. Another possibility is means testing. Now, what does means testing mean? Means testing, we've talked a little bit about this well, maybe we haven't, but it comes up when you're talking about welfare. I could go down to the welfare office. There's probably no such thing, but anyway, I could go down to wherever people go down to and file for food stamps. I don't think they're going to give me food stamps. I'm just guessing. Because presumably, hopefully I make too much money. Please, Georgia, pay me too much for food stamps. So they're going to say, I don't need it. That's what means testing is. Are you poor enough to actually need this, this help? So, there's another thing about Social Security. It's not a flat pay thing. If you make a good wage over the course of your life and you pay into the system a professional tax over the course of your life, when you retire, the help you're going to get is going to be the help that a professional would get, an executive would get. If you are a working man and you make a working man's wage over the course of your life and pay a working man's taxes over the course of your life, then you're going to get a working man's stipend out the other end. All right? So if you're concerned about how the money balances out for Social Security, one of the questions you have to ask yourself is, the people who need it the least are also the people who are getting the biggest slice of it, right? If you're really making $250,000 a year and you're halfway decent with money, chances are you don't need Social Security at all, right? So that's where the mean testing comes in. How much do people really need, and can we take some of this from the people that don't need it and put it back in so that the system stays solvent? It's not even for the people who need it, it's so the system remains solvent, period. Go ahead.
But why should the people who put in the most money suffer because they make the most money? I mean, they did like bust their ass to get there, so they should get something back, and they're putting in the most money.
So you're in favor of welfare for rich people?
I mean, they're the ones putting in the money, they should get some of it out of it. I'm
yes,
just all
but
about not getting something for nothing.
yes, but hold on, because we're not talking about something for nothing. I mean, think about this. We're not talking about something for nothing. We're not talking about the ideological side of this. We're talking about this system won't exist. Now, and we won't address this. We won't talk about this. This system will not exist as it stands for 1 year old. Period. Unless we change it. So the question suddenly becomes, how do we keep the system on the table? All right? Now, you're leading us to the next point. What do right, left, right? What do the cons say? They say the system's broke. You're not gonna fix it. So you end up with this really interesting problem where the left is saying, here are the things we need to do to make it work. And the right is saying, yeah, whatever, right? Because it's not fair in the first place. Or you're not getting, well, let's hold on, let's not go that far. Since the left thinks government exists for people and to help people, that's where we're starting with that. What does the right think about government? The right actually think government can't run things very well. If you accept that fundamental premise of conservatives, then the rest of this falls in place, right? So these guys are going to say it's inefficient and wasteful. First of all, if the first 3 decades of this system, that money wasn't used to back losers of programs elsewhere, we'd have a lot of money. But instead it was frittered away, that's the word. Secondly, if I was able to take, this is an argument they're going to make, if I was able to take the Social Security taxes that have been taken from me over the course of my life and simply invest it, I mean, I don't need to get 10% returns to do better. I could do better on 5% returns. Fairly conservative investment strategies and I'm going to end up with more money. But notice, this is a problem now and not a problem from here. Because today's old people have gotten a phenomenal deal. My grandmother is 99, no, she's 100. She's 100 years old. If she, and I don't ask her about her business, but if she retired at 65 and started drawing Social Security, you will note she has drawn Social Security for as many years as she worked. Okay? Now, if we take inflation, let's see, if Grandma's 100 and she started working when she was 20, that was 80 years ago, which would have been 1932? 1930, just for fun. So if Grandma's making $5,000 a year, that was a lot of money then. $1,000 a year in 1920, 1930, whatever. And she's drawing somewhere in the neighborhood of 35 or 40,000 in today's dollars. Her pay-in is like this, and her pullout is like this, right? Now, God bless Grandma, I'm not picking on her, but I am saying the math behind this system is a little bit sketchy, right? And if it's your money, because that's the second thing, when Al Gore, you guys, the youngsters don't remember this, the lockbox. When Al Gore looks at the Social Security Trust Fund and sees a certain amount of money, him and all the other politicians see, well, it's money, what can we do with this, right? When you look at your retirement portfolio, you see your money. You see your life's work. And when you decide what to do with it, you don't make these decisions lightly. If you're concerned about the economy and you move it to something stabler, it's because you're really scared about the economy. If you watch it go down, then that's your, that's what you're going to live on when you're old. That's concerning to people. So, another element of the conservative position is people are going to manage their own money better than the government's going to, right? And so, the solution for these guys is always private accounts. With the idea being, like I said, you're going to be more careful if it's your money because you have skin in the game. And number two, you're not going to be as wasteful as the government is trying to run plans that don't even have to add up. Your budget has to add up. The government, somehow it doesn't seem to, right? So these are the two ideological perspectives, right? And I can think of critiques of both of them. If I was to critique the liberal perspective, there's an element to this where if we just keep saying, now we just need to tweak it, now we just need to tweak it, now we just need to tweak it, you could end up quite a ways down a very dangerous road without realizing this is fundamentally broken. No, we'll just tweak it a little bit. Like there's Band-Aids, and then you realize that your problem's really gangrene, and Band-Aid isn't going to work anymore. The conservative criticism I would have isn't so much about the conservatives' plans, so much as the way this ends up being part of, politicians will call it the third rail. We won't touch Social Security. When liberals want to pick on the Tea Party, they say, we need small government, we need the government out of people's lives, we need people off of welfare, but give me my Social Security, right? Where does this come from, right? And the answer is if you're 50 years old and you've built your financial life with this being a component of your retirement, and you've paid in for the first 30 years of your work life, you're going to look at this and you're going to say, I paid, I'm owed, right? Even though, and that's I don't know if the government thinks they owe any of us anything. So that owing is in our own heads, I will say that. But I've paid, so I'm owed. So Social Security is the quickest way to turn a small government conservative into a big government liberal over a moment's notice. Well, we're just going to get rid of this. I've been paying this tax my whole stinking life. What do you mean you're just going to take it away now? Right? Now, this creates, for all of us, but for the politicians who are trying to sort this out, a rock and a hard place and a hard place. The very first rock is that it's broken. The very second rock is what that means for the different perspectives is you're going to have to come up with different responses. The third thing is ideology goes completely out the window when it comes down to the actual pragmatics, right? When we're talking real money and it feels like my money, then the ideology doesn't matter. Go ahead.
I don't even know if I want to approach this, but it seems like on the left side, the answer to almost everything is raise taxes, raise taxes, raise taxes. And I mean, I'm kind of in the middle because I mean, raising the taxes is only affecting the people who are already paying taxes. But I feel like the main issue, from what I've been shown, is that there's too many people that are getting to a certain age, so too many people taking out and not enough people putting in.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a big gap where there's people who are just sitting. And I'm not trying to get on that debate, but sitting and not working and not putting in and taking out.
Yeah, it's a math problem.
But how can you expect people to work if there's no jobs for them to
There
work?
is jobs, but there's just some jobs.
Really? Because I've been applying for a long time and I still haven't found a job. I mean,
Yeah.
there are jobs out there, but there's not enough jobs for everyone to be working right now and paying into the system.
But some people think they're too good to work
Yeah.
some jobs. You
Yeah.
can't.
But that's a small amount of people. Y'all are thinking of like the worst of the worst. That's the small amount. Most of the people that are getting the money in from welfare and stuff are trying to find jobs. Like there's a reason they don't have a job.
You know what? I would take that step. Hold on. I would take that step and I would go further with that. I would go further with that because I honestly don't care if somebody deserves this money. Sorry, I don't. I don't. So why should they? Whatever. Do they deserve? Watch this. Are you ready? Are you ready? This is going to be awesome. Oh, it would help if I could spell. Right? We're not done yet. Are you watching? Okay, there we go. The reason I don't care about deserve is I'm interested in the math problem here. All right? And I like understanding the political perspectives insofar as they help us understand the math problem. I very, very, very much dislike the political perspectives when it comes to obscuring or occluding what's going on here. All right? So, yes, we have more people taking out than we have paying in. And that's an issue. And it's going to get much, much, much worse. I mean, we have to recognize that. Go ahead.
That was the reason that I didn't want to make a comment. But,
You can make a comment.
okay, but back to the whole thing, like, I'm not saying that there's the obvious idea that I was saying that everyone's lazy. I'm saying that, of course, there aren't jobs, but I think the focus should be more on not raise taxes or do this or do that, or attack the people who are on welfare, or attack the people who are on that, because that seems to be the common idea. But the fact of the matter is there aren't jobs to get.
Mm-hmm.
So clearly, a lot of more people are going to take it out. And there's a small group of people who are just taking and not trying to look for a job. That's a fact. There always will be, most likely.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? But the fact of the matter is until there's more jobs or until there's more people putting in, this system will never be successful.
And not only that, it gets even scarier. I mean, yes, I agree, people who scam the system are aggravating. Okay, you're 100% right. There will be cheaters. We'll let somebody else chase down the cheaters. I kind of don't care about that at the moment. This is not a welfare problem. This is a ginormous, ginormous math problem. And this is where the welfare discussion kind of frustrates me. Because when we're talking about the federal government going broke, this is what we're talking about. We're not talking about the 10% or whatever that goes to welfare. Because this even goes a step further. We're talking about Social Security here. We haven't even remotely begun to talk about Medicare, but there are some hands. Go ahead.
This is just a clarification question.
Yes.
With Social Security, for example, so I got a letter in the mail, has my Social Security number on it. It says, hey, you have worked, you have put in so much money that when you become of age, you can start drawing, this much money worth of Social Security. Is that not for everyone? Like, if you don't put in enough, are you still able to draw out?
That's a good question. I don't know if there's a minimum. I suspect there is. Just because it sounds bad if we let Grandma eat cat food.
I mean, but you would think that if there is a minimum, I mean, obviously I received this letter for a reason. If there is a minimum, that would somewhat eliminate kind of like eliminate what you just did, eliminate the deserve, because obviously I put in enough to be able to, so.
Yeah, I like that. You're making me think something. Go ahead, Sarah.
Putting my virtual opinion aside with the safety net programs and everything, between Medicare and Social Security and everything, all of these programs were supposed to be taken away before 1941. All of them.
I'm not sure about that, but if you say it, I'll
What
let
are the New Deal programs? My question is, what did people do depend so harshly on these programs before the 1930s? And why are
that's actually a really good question. The reason Social Security exists is in part because the Great Depression was as bad as it was. Our poor people are obese, which is, I'm not picking on fat people or poor people, but this is a unique moment in history. In the Great Depression, our poor people were anorexic, except that's not really the right word for it when you're involuntarily starving. That's one part of it. The second part of it is having grandma eat cat food is not a joke. I mean, that came from somewhere. And the seniors, we're also at a really weird spot now where our seniors aren't the poorest members in society. When these things were started, back in the New Deal era, you had the lost generation who were seniors, and they were the poorest of the poor. Nowadays, the folks that are old now are actually kind of well-to-do. The part that's scary about it is the boomers right behind them who are just hitting are underinvested, which means they are going to be relying on this more than others.
What would happen if we took those programs away now? I mean, and I know certain politicians are trying to slowly take away these programs or at least regulate them, but if we took them away and told everybody, hey, we're not going to take any of your money, but now you have to fend for yourself, would our economic status fall apart?
Well,
You have a lot of people doing a lot more stealing for food.
yeah, I believe that.
And you're going to end up with violence with a reason. The welfare and Social Security need to be there. They need to be better controlled, obviously, and checked. But you can't throw that away. You can't throw away your old people. You can't watch people starve. People throw money at the TV when they show the poor dead, poor starving dogs. But there's people who are that hungry, and it is abused. It needs to be fixed, but it still has to be there as long as we're going to be the society that we are now.
If we set up a program where the baby boomers, the generation that's coming up, that's about to receive Social Security, if we stop taking money out of their checks, and we still supported the elderly now, but once the elderly, was gone, shut up. I'm sorry.
It's always going to be elderly, though.
But what I'm saying is if we set it up to where, let's say, the cutoff is 65 for Social Security right now, right? If we say everybody under the age of 60, we're going to stop taking out, you know, a certain amount of money out of your checks now, and you have to save up yourself, we'll give you back what you've put in, but you have to make, and then everybody over the age of 60, we continued Social Security, but slowly took away what we have now. Would that work? Would our crime change from, you know, shooting people up to stealing food out of groceries?
You're
And they
basically
can
saying
still
like,
take it out, it'd kind of be like a 401k where they take it out.
That's what you would replace it
Yeah.
with. Here's my answer to that, and you guys are all free to hop in with this. What you think is going to happen is going to depend on which side of the classroom you're sitting on. So these guys say, oh my God, you're making grandma eat cat food, they're going to starve. And the fact of the matter is, some people will starve, because there are some people who are that bad off nowadays. If you don't know where to look, you might not find them. Even if you know who they are, they might not tell you how bad off they are. But the left is going to say society will fall apart. The right is going to say, and there's a lot of truth to this too, the right's going to say, look, grandma will come live with you, because that's what people did in the past. And we're not going to let these people die. The churches will step in, private charities will step in, and the people who are behind them will do a better job of investing. All of that is true as well. So I want to be careful, because any answer I give you that leans too much this way is going to be politically biased. Any answer that leans too much this way is going to be politically biased. In their nightmare scenario, yes, society falls apart. No, that's not going to happen, but some people will starve. In this nightmare scenario, I don't know if, well, they don't have a nightmare scenario. In their overly rosy scenario, we're not all going to suddenly come up with $100,000 retirement accounts like they are. If you're working, you're going to have a hard time saving on what working people make in our world. That's a fact. That's a fact. So that's why I try and do class this way, because I think we really need to see what they're actually saying. Here's an interesting example. When I was in Gettysburg, we did this project where they could, and it's a long story, the Pennsylvania couldn't pass a budget, so all the social services went unfunded. And what was interesting is less than a week before the homeless shelter was scheduled to close. So that, I mean, it's pretty bad, right? When the homeless shelter is scheduled to close, a private donation steps in. And they wanted to keep it hush at the beginning because they didn't want everyone to know who it was. But after it was all over and funding was restored, they let it be known that it was actually the hospital that gave the money. And the reason the hospital gave the money, and this hints at kind of what you're getting at, the reason the hospital gave the money was because in Pennsylvania, in the winter, if you close the homeless shelter, which is one source of public money getting spent, what you're going to see is people coming in with frostbite and hypothermia and dying of exposure, and the hospital is going to have to cover that. So for the hospital, it was actually an investment to keep the homeless shelter open. And I think that's where, and the reason I say that is because the people who know say, you know what, if we let that go, there are going to be negative outcomes. And they didn't, I don't know, it was interesting. So that kind of plays a little bit to what you're saying.
I mean, you can't rely on the kindness of, you know, people with money. There's a reason they have their money. They're hardworking. They, you know what they need to do for themselves. I'm not saying they're selfish, but
You're supposed to be selfish. That's the way our system works.
exactly.
Gordon Gekko, greed is good.
But
Nobody knows. All right, go ahead.
you're gonna go over your thing. I don't understand how we keep putting the system into place when it's only putting our country further and further into debt. And in all honesty, it's keeping us afloat.
Oh, that's the second one. So, I'm sorry. The second thing you said, the second point that what you said brings up is, notice there's a fundamental generational unfairness thing, right? So we'll take care of the boomers, but the Xers, who were hammered as kids, and the late boomers who were, right? we'll just let them hang. We'll just, you know, you guys can sort it out. I'm sorry. Thank you. That made me think that. So here's this one group. They went to school. It was cheap, right? The boomers who are up here now did not go to school and take on $40,000 of student loans like many of you guys are. School was cheap. They could pay it off with a summer job, and they went to good schools, right? They got into computers. Computers took off. They made plenty of money. I mean, this is the benefit to being that bulge. So now they're up here. They didn't save. Why? Because they're building those houses out in the suburbs that we were talking about. If you're behind them, and you are behind them, why do you think college costs so much for you, and you have to take on student loans to the tunes of tens of thousands of dollars, right? It's part of that system changing. So, of course, there's a point where, oh, gee, that's a shame. You didn't save. Well, we'll take care of you, but the people behind you, right? And that's been an issue all the way through. Jamie and then Chris.
What I was thinking is, there's this thing, and it's talking about, just for example, a sign in a wilderness park that says, "Don't feed the animals because they'll become dependent."
Mm-hmm.
But then, you know, we just keep on giving and giving and giving. If we took that away, eventually they would have to become independent because they are not getting, you know, all this free stuff all the time, and it would actually help the economy in the permanent.
I don't know if it would help the economy. It would force people to fend for themselves.
Yeah, for sure.
As Curtis says, when you're stealing from the grocery, you're fending for yourself. And this is the thing, is you're right to a point. I agree with the political perspective you bring to class. I think it's great. But there's to a point there. I don't know what else to say.
In terms of looking at,
Go ahead.
looking at solutions, I pay, as being one of the older people in here, I pay a good bit of taxes. It hurts every time they take it out. But even looking at the solutions that you have over here on the board, granted, I'm nowhere near to having to worry about them taking out more taxes on me if they take the cap away. But I don't see a problem with taking the cap away, nor do I see a big problem if it's going to sustain the system to raising it 4%, or at least whatever that cap doesn't cover. You know, if you got more, you're going to spend more. But you know, if you're making $250 a year, I don't see why your Social Security tax should stop it at 110 or 115. Like I said, police don't have to worry about that. But you know, and I say that because even though I get irritated with the people who aren't working, that I run into, you know, on different calls, I also run into the people who can't work, and we can't, as a society, let that, you know, cut that off. The one thing I've never figured out in the last 25 years of being in this town, with all the big churches that we have, we really do not have a homeless shelter. There's one church on the east end of town that has a small homeless shelter set up, and that's it. And I bet you it doesn't hold 10 people. We have to take our homeless to Macon or somewhere else if there is one. We have some homeless here. Mainly, the worst system that we have in society to me is the mental health system, because we got a lot of people ain't taking their pills walking down the street. But and there's a lot of people that need to. But there's the most trouble. Actually, we spend more time hunting people threatening to commit suicide than we do hunting bad guys these days, because that happens just about every day.
Yeah. You know, what you're saying reminds me of a project I worked on when I was in pharma. We were working with a company that made not antidepressants. We did those too, but this was antipsychotics for schizophrenics. And so I actually did a couple hundred interviews with either schizophrenics or their caretakers. Now, it really is true that a big chunk of our homeless population is crazy. It's not a stereotype. it's not a mischaracterization. It actually comes out of closing down our state facilities 20 or 30 years ago in the 70s and 80s. And there was not the follow-up that there was supposed to be. Shocker, I know. So essentially you're taking schizophrenics whose understanding of reality is very different than yours and mine, and putting them out on the street with no real follow-up, no real help for them. And so if it's hard for regular people to hold a job, and it's hard for regular people to make it through daily life, just imagine what it's like if your underlying reality is fundamentally different. And what really got me with these stories is I would talk to one after another, and the stories were all the same. It would come on when I was in college. You know, I was young and it was a stressful period. The schizophrenia, I didn't even know I had it. And then they black out, and the next thing they know, they wake up 3 days later in a holding facility. So, in fact, without having a mental health option to deal with these folks, the cops in the jails are the ones who have to deal with them, right? Now, I would love the anarchist world where we knew that everybody was grown up enough to actually do this. But I'm not sure that that's really there. You take away something for schizophrenics, and that's just one example because these are the people I was dealing with. You take that away, and in a world of, in a city of 20, 30, 40,000 people, or let's go up to Atlanta, a city of 5 million, you're going to have a critical mass of folks who just are not on the same page. And you got to have some way to deal with them. And the thing is, if we get rid of this, some old guy who's got no family is going to starve in his apartment because
If he has one.
Pardon?
If he has one.
Right.
It only takes a couple of elderly people dead, frozen in the winter, in a vacant house to convince you we can't stop the system.
Yeah.
It does need fixing. And that will, what most people don't see, and you don't see it on the news because, we don't advertise it, but it happens.
Yeah. I like it.
If
Very
we
good.
took that though, I mean, like what you see every day, the majority of us don't, ever. It barely comes into our realities. If we took that and forced people to recognize the reality that we are living in, once we...
Do you remember, what's that movie with Jack Nicholson?
But
You can't handle the truth! I mean, joking aside, I think there's ugliness underneath every job. I think there's a fundamental reality that most of us don't honestly want to get to. When I say, again, half jokingly, everyone's lying to you, it's only half jokingly, right? If we really saw what the cops see, if we really saw what the teachers in the disastrous inner cities see, if we really saw the backroom deals that politicians feel like they have to do to make it happen, if we really knew whatever it is the big O knows about foreign relations, Obama, then then all of a sudden ideology, I think, would evaporate fairly quickly. I think the real world is just scary, messy.
Well, okay, you were talking about, what country was it?
I don't know.
Where they all helped each other.
Oh,
like, no matter
yeah,
what.
Iceland.
Iceland. But if we knew what was really going on with that, I know this is completely, oh, the world's a good place of me, but wouldn't that force us to break the community out?
You're very sweet.
no.
I'm not.
It might not. The fact that people don't want to see the truth because they don't want to accept it. They'd rather take the easy lie than the hard truth.
Yeah, I think that's true.
But you're also right. In times of hardship, they could, when faced with the truth, people could band together and start helping each other out of the goodness of the heart.
I would say this. I mean, that's the conservative side, and I like the conservative side, that it rests upon a certain assumption of anarchy, that we are good people, and I mean good anarchy, that we are good people, we're going to self-regulate, we're going to talk to each other about our problems, and we're going to solve things. This is not, I love America, but on a lot of issues we're not the best country in the world, but I'm going to say we're not the worst country in the world, and there are places on the earth where people confront these realities on a day-to-day basis, and it doesn't make them better people, and it doesn't make their public sector a better public sector. If anything, it causes them to be less trusting and more insular. Chris, and then Billy.
We kind of went way past where I was getting with it.
I know you were trying very hard there.
I'll still say, first off, I have a question, I guess, and then second off, I have a comment.
Yes.
So the first question will be, my parents have always told me, like, when I look at my taxes or look at my paycheck, I see Social Security and Medicare.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, well, you're probably never going to see that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you talk about the conservative side saying eliminate it. Well, if we eliminate the system, all the money, not that I've put in that much, I'm only working at Kroger, but I'm saying the money that I put in, if we eliminate the system, well, how in the world am I going to get it now? If we eliminate the system. I mean, all the people who've been paying in, we just eliminate the system, where's the money?
There's a good chance.
You know, that's why I say that ode is in our heads. That money that you paid in is gone. You're never going to see it.
Never really had it.
It would be nice if Social Security is around when you're old and you get some. That will actually be other people's money. So it's already gone. It's already gone. Just bye-bye. Now, we would, hopefully there's something for the rest of us. Whether that is or is not, I mean, that's a whole other conversation. Billy?
Well, in reference to what they were saying about people being together, unfortunately, and social psychology and sociology itself shows that it's just not the way people operate. They do the experiments where they'll take a little kid and put them in the city, and they're screaming, "Help! Help! Somebody help me! This person's not my parent." Everybody just keeps walking by, and 30 people walk by before somebody finally stops.
Well, yeah, and we talked about this at the beginning of the semester, remember? There's an awesome, if you want to read something entertaining, go look it's on cracked.com, which is very funny, but a little bit dirty, so brace yourself. And they have a thing on, you're going to have to dig around and find it, because I can't tell you the search terms, but it's on the monkey brain, okay? Now there's some research amongst primate researchers that suggests, and this is relevant, that suggests you can tell that the size of the monkey's brain is directly proportional to the size of its social group. So monkeys with small social groups have relatively small brains, right? Monkeys with larger social groups have relatively larger brains. Now, why that is, who knows? It's a correlation, not causation. But according to these guys then, now think about how much of life this explains. Your brain is built for a social group of about 250 people, maybe 300. So then think about how many people are on your Facebook account. It's probably a couple hundred right in there. Think about how many people you're related to and actually count as acquaintances. People you could, today and tomorrow, remember by name. It's probably a couple hundred. Why is it that somebody that you meet who's suffering here today has more of an effect on you than knowing that on NPR yesterday, there are counties in Alabama where the employment is so bad, 25% of working adults are on disability, right? Well, that's just a number. No, that's tens of thousands of men and women. Yeah, but it's just a number. But this person here, you can see and touch and smell and feel, they're suffering. That makes sense to you. This is why, I keep coming back to when marketers, propagandists, people are throwing out stories and emotions, it's because that's the way your brain works. You need to try and see the stats. And so, yeah, outside of that 250, you got to be a pretty good person to help. Notice Jesus' story about the Good Samaritan was shocking because of how weird it was. Go ahead, Chris. I cut you off, didn't I? You had more.
But another problem that I see some days, and I don't understand how it can happen, it seems like I've actually seen someone who is clearly of age to receive Social Security, and they're also on food stamps. How can you double dip like that?
You got to be really broke.
I mean, like, but if you're drawing Social Security, I mean.
Social Security is not that
How does
much.
it work? I mean, I don't know, I'm only 20 years old.
Your Social Security is not gonna be that much. It's gonna be barely enough to keep you ahead if you've got a house.
Yeah.
If you don't have a house, you're gonna need the food stamps to eat.
Yeah, it might cover rent, it might.
Okay.
I mean, you're talking like maybe 700 people.
So I
700
always
bucks a
wondered
month.
why they could do that. That seemed kind of like, because I thought the Social Security pretty much everybody kind of received even.
It's not to help you, it's to keep you.
Yeah, I mean, here's the other thing.
Kind of just basically like a paycheck.
Here's the other thing about this. One way, this is why you gotta watch out for governments. Not why, I mean, it sounds like I'm picking on the government, I'm not. But when somebody says, well, the economy grew at 5% or 3% last year, and inflation was only 1%, that sounds great, right? What you don't see is that by the time you're old, that 1% means compounded, means the money's like this. Your savings stayed like this. If they're having trouble balancing the budgets, one way to balance the budgets is to just fob it off on inflation. And lo and behold, you'll get Social Security. It'll be about $14, right? And that's another way that'll happen. Go ahead, Daryl, you had your hand up, yes? No? Okay. Now, let me throw one more thing out here. So far, we've only talked about Social Security, Medicare. Medicare makes this problem, in my mind, and I'd love to, I need to go back and look at the numbers, but if Social Security is a pure math problem, the number of old people is growing on top, the number of young people is shrinking on the bottom, so you've got a numerator problem and a denominator problem. Medicare is multiplied by the fact that not only is that ratio changing, but how much we're spending on people's care at different points in their life is multiplying. Like if this is a math problem, we've got the ratio, and then we've got a multiplier, okay? So something like 25 to 30%, when you go looking, you're gonna have to dig around because this is hard even for the Medicare people to get a figure on. Something like 25 to 30% is spent on end-of-life care, which I would say, just for the sake of discussion, we'll say 12 to 18 months, okay? 12 to 18 months, and that's 30% of their budget. And it's not as if healthcare in the US is getting cheaper. So take the math problem here and multiply it by the healthcare cost problem, which is further multiplied by the fact that we're looking at that last year of life, and you're stuck with yet another system that's unsustainable, right? These guys say, well, we can tweak it and fix it. These guys say, ah, the hell with it, health savings accounts. The fact is, at some point, we don't really want to be turning people out back on the street when they're having a heart attack. But hospitals will, if they can, because they're businesses, and they need to make their bottom lines match up. Go ahead.
This could be wrong, this is rumors, and I guess it all depends on what news you watch. But a big problem with the health care plan, that in the original works, I don't even know what it is now, to be honest with you. I kind of lost track, kind of like the gun thing, kind of disappeared too. But I think I remember hearing something about at a certain age, once you reach a certain age, they can deny you service at a hospital.
Yeah, I never actually looked into that. There was a whole death panel thing, and there's
Life work or something like that.
And there's the rationing thing. And we're stuck with this, we're stuck with a problem, right? This is the philosophical problem. We value life. That's the philosophical problem. The reason it's a problem is because we say you can't put a dollar value on life. And yet, every day, all day long, everyone in America puts a dollar value on life. I'm carrying life insurance. If I get covered, my widow gets taken care of. How much? Well, it's probably a math function based on what I actually make, right? My life has a dollar value. If you run me over on the way out of the door here and I die, she can sue you for whatever I make now over the expectations of my career. My life has a dollar value. Similarly, medical care is not unlimited, right? there are not enough doctors or MRIs or all of it for everybody to get everything they want. In a market system, like over here, that rationing is controlled by price, right? So I'm not getting, what do rich people get? Liposuction and Botox, because those aren't things I want to pay for out of pocket. Ooh, and testosterone supplements. Would I like to feel like I was 20?
Hair plugs.
Yeah, I don't need hair plugs yet. Would I like to feel like I was 20? Absolutely. Is it worth spending tens of thousands of dollars? No, right? Is going to the doctor for some antibiotics when I have a really bad cold? Yes, I'll spend that $100. I'm not going to spend this $10,000, right? So, when we start talking about having somebody else pay, the problem you run into is we need to decide where that money is going to be spent, because now it's not. Now there's not that price rationing. You have to have some other sort of rationing. So the question then becomes, really, truly, how much is this person's life worth at this point? Now, the conservatives, because they don't like the plan, will call it death penalties, right? Those who are not conservatives, I don't want to say liberals, I mean maybe people in the middle on this one, will say you recognize if 30% is being spent on that end of life, and if we insist that every old person be resuscitated at whatever cost in the hospital, this is part of that bridge of the truth. I'm told hospital workers rarely have resuscitate orders on themselves. They have their own DNRs. Because when you take an 85-year-old lady and you start doing chest compressions, you shatter all her ribs, right? And then you lacerate her lungs. And yeah, you got grandma back, but now grandma's miserable and you got a month out of it and you spent how many tens of thousands of dollars on it. So these guys say, on the one hand, oh, that's death penalties, we can't have people making those decisions. Well, if you had to pay that bill, you would say, let's let grandma go in peace. If you had to actually experience resuscitating that poor old woman and hear her ribs cracking, you would say, let's let grandma go in peace. This is a respectful way to do it. But as far as that you can't handle the truth thing goes, no, just save grandma. You handle it, and government will pay the bill, or the insurance will pay the bill, and I don't have to worry about it. See what I'm saying? I don't know. Billy, last word? I think we're about done.
I just think that a big problem with this side is that they're not taking consideration that not everyone can get health insurance. I'm not talking about whether they can afford it or not. I'm saying that if they're going to go off of this idea that, you know, you can get health insurance, then the health insurance policies have to change, because you can be denied health insurance for being too sick or being too fat.
Absolutely. And you know, it's interesting because the Obamacare strives to sort of try and cover that. I mean, I cannot do a bullet point on Obamacare. There's too much to it, and I don't actually understand it. It doesn't fit nicely into this, and it doesn't fit nicely into this. On the one hand, maybe they put it together and it's going to work the way it's supposed to. I mean, we can hope. On the other hand, more regulation leads to more unintended consequences. But you could also, I mean, I've seen people make the argument, except for extreme catastrophic insurance, why don't we have a cash healthcare system? Watch prices become affordable overnight. Someone else is going to have to handle the cancer costs and the car crash costs, but for going to the doctor, having babies, right, getting your insulin, those, you know, and I don't know if anyone's going to do it. It's an interesting thought experiment to think about. All right, thanks everybody. That was fun.